Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're taking a look at the Rolex Submariner versus the Yacht-Master 40. So let's take a look at some brief history on these two iconic watches from Rolex. So we're going to start with the Submariner because that's the watch that came first. The Submariner was released in the 1950s as a professional dive tool. It's very much a tool watch back then, very much a utility watch designed for professionals only. And the watch was designed to dive to quite deep depths. Around that time, it was able to dive to 200 meters in the 50s, mid-50s. The watch was built brilliantly, very, very solid, and was very popular amongst divers. Featured various dive functions, useful features, obviously like a deep dive depth or a watch that's able to withstand great pressure, but also a rotating bezel to measure elapsed time for your dive time. But over the years, it became actually more popular with the general public. The reason being is because it was built so well. It was built to withstand that sort of pressure, meant that it was easy for it to withstand day-to-day abuse. It was a very versatile watch also in terms of its looks. It was obviously very sporty in comparison to dress watches in that time, but it was a great watch nonetheless, and it was incredibly popular. And around the 60s, late 60s, Rolex recognized how popular this watch had become, not just with divers but with the general public, and they added a date function to the watch as kind of a nod to those that will actually be using this in the office and just as their daily wearer. The watch became even more popular and has remained one of the most popular watches from Rolex ever. In fact, it's probably one of the most important watches Rolex makes, along with the Daytona. Extensive waiting lists for just a standard steel Submariner. I'm sure it will always remain one of their most important models. But around the 90s, Rolex looked to actually update the Submariner and completely redesign it. And they actually designed a watch that looked totally different, in fact, to what they had originally made with the Submariner. The Submariner had barely changed over those years when it was released, over those 40 years. So they really wanted to completely redesign it and give a fresh look. But they were actually really scared when they designed it and realized how different it was to the original version. So much so that they thought, we can't release this as the replacement for the Submariner. It's too much of a risk for us to risk all that history and all that popularity that the Submariner has already shown itself over those years, those 40 years, to replace it and then have everyone really hate this new version. It's just not worth the risk for us. So let's keep the Submariner as it is, keep updating it slightly and make it the same looking watch, but release this watch that we've just designed, the updated Submariner, as a brand new model. So they released in the 90s the Yacht-Master. Now, Yacht-Master was actually a name that they had trademarked many years before that, copyrighted many years before that. They just used that watch, that name for the watch. This newer design was really different. It was featured much more softer edges. It featured a polished case. It was also only available in precious metal. It was generally designed as a much more luxurious variant of the Submariner. That was kind of their idea for it because of the popularity the Submariner had, no longer with divers, but actually just with the general public. And in fact, very few divers were buying that watch anymore. Rolex wanted to basically make a watch for the general public that was a little bit more luxurious than they'd originally set out to create with that, boxy, much more bulky, rugged Submariner. So the Yacht-Master was much more luxurious, only available in precious metals, high polished case, much more rounded edges, a much more elegant, dressy looking piece with polished center links, etc., etc. So they released the watch as the Yacht-Master. The Yacht-Master obviously the name lends itself very well to this watch because yes, it has all these nautical themes and extras on it and features like, for example, a rotating bezel with elapsed time, like the dive watch, like the Submariner, and also a water resistance of 100 meters. So it definitely had a nautical theme about it. So they wanted to keep that, hence Yacht-Master, but also the fact that it was much more geared towards a luxurious environment. The yacht is obviously a very luxurious environment, so the Yacht-Master name fit pretty perfectly with that. So in 1992 at Basel, Rolex released the 16628 reference, and that was a full yellow gold Yacht-Master with a white dial, iconic yellow gold with white dial combination from Rolex there. And The watch was quite popular at the time. It was obviously a brand new model, so it's super exciting, and it was only available in precious metal as well. So it was the type of watch like the Day-Date is now, the Day-Dates. They are kind of seen as kind of the higher end level of Rolex's collection. And the Yacht-Master is the same. Back then it was only available in precious metal, so anyone who owned a Yacht-Master was deemed as kind of one of their high-end clients. Later on in 1999, they recognized the demand for a steel combination watch or a bimetal watch, because people really missed that more casual theme that you can get from steel, and more usable for everyday use as well. The steel is much better for everyday use. So in 1999, Rolex released the Rolesium edition of the Yacht-Master, and that was a steel watch with a platinum bezel. And they also released some bimetal variations of the Yacht-Master as well during that time. So there was kind of a slightly more affordable option for this Yacht-Master, still maintaining that really dressy classic appearance though. Okay, so skip another few years now onto 2007. That's when we saw the next major release in the Yacht-Master line, and that was when we saw the release of the Yacht-Master 2. I'm not going to look at that at all. In fact, if you want to learn about the Yacht-Master 2, then please go and check out my review of that watch. And that'll go much more into depth of its features and the reason why Rolex introduced it to the collection, and also its history as well. But essentially that was a 44mm case size Yacht-Master with different functions completely to the previous Yacht-Masters and the Submariner. At that point, that Yacht-Master really became its own individual watch and no longer really looked like the Submariner anymore. It kind of became its own model. Okay, so that concludes the history of the Yacht-Master and the Submariner. Let's take a look now at each of these watches and look at their features. So we're going to start with the clasp as always. So looking at the Submariner now, we've got a glide lock clasp which features an incredible level of adjustment. The reason why Rolex has that on this watch is because it's a dive watch, and it's designed for divers to basically be able to wear it every day and also on dives. The reason why it's got glide lock on there is so that they can wear the watch over the top of a wetsuit, so expand the bracelet out to a much larger size, have it over the top of a wetsuit when they're doing dives, and then be able to make it smaller, shrink it down, adjust it using that glide lock clasp, and be able to wear it for everyday use as well. Previous to that, people had to adjust the bracelet and take out links and place in links, according to when they were going to wear the watch. So it wasn't as wearable as the modern day variations are. The glide lock clasp on the Submariner is absolutely fantastic. It's incredibly solid, extremely easy to use, and it's not actually just useful for people who want to wear it when swimming with a wetsuit. It's actually an extremely useful feature for people during everyday use. Your wrist expands and contracts during the day, especially in the summer when it gets hot. So it's a really useful feature to make sure that bracelet stays comfortable all day long. On the Yacht-Master, we have a much smaller clasp. It's not a glide lock clasp, it's just the standard oyster clasp. This one features our 5mm of easy link adjustment, so we get a 5mm to expand the bracelet by 5mm. Usually that does enough for you if your bracelet is feeling a little tight, if your wrist has expanded a bit, but yeah, nowhere near the level of adjustability that the Submariner has. Nonetheless, a great clasp. Both of them are extremely solid. Which I prefer, probably I'd say I'd prefer the Submariner clasp because it's so adjustable and so comfortable. However, I much prefer the more compact size of the oyster clasp. It is a much nicer looking clasp because it's not so massive. Moving now on to our bracelet. They both feature a oyster bracelet. The Yacht-Master features polished center links and the Submariner features a full brush finish. The difference here is obviously how they look and how they wear. They both have the same level of comfort. You can't tell the difference between them when you're wearing them, but the look of them is obviously quite different, and the polished center links on the Yacht-Master really lends itself to that polished case, that much more dressy looking watch that the Yacht-Master was designed to be. It's definitely more luxurious looking. Obviously the GMT Master features this polished center link, and the reason why the Submariner is one of the only watches in the collection just to feature that brushed finish is because it is designed for a tool, a utility purpose. It was designed for a professional who's diving, who doesn't necessarily want something super shiny and blingy and glinting off in the water when you're diving, and also something that's really easy to be able to get scratched on sand or whatever. So it was much more fit to purpose to have that brushed finish. There are other watches in the Rolex collection that feature brush finish watches as well, like the Explorers, but again, they're designed for exploring and a much more utility purpose than something like a GMT Master or a Daytona or a Yacht-Master. Which of these two bracelets do I prefer? I would say I probably prefer the Submariner bracelet. I much prefer that brush finish because I think it's much more understated. I like that kind of utilitarian look about the Submariner. I really like the Yacht-Master though. I think the Yacht-Master bracelet does look really elegant. It's definitely more dressy, definitely far more suitable for someone who's wearing this perhaps on more formal occasions. Maybe if you're wearing a suit every day for work, I'd say that probably the Yacht-Master is a better option. Now moving on to the case, which is probably where we're going to see the biggest difference between these two watches. The Yacht-Master appears much smaller than the Submariner. The Submariner features a big, bulky, super case design. They're both the same millimeters in terms of diameter, but at 40 millimeters that is, but they are pretty different in terms of the way they wear. The Submariner has much more of a bulky feel in terms of its depths as well, not just the lugs, but the depth is much greater, or feels much greater on the Submariner. Probably the most noticeable thing is the fact that we've got a polished finish, all polished finish on the Yacht-Master versus a brushed finish on the Submariner. Probably also a very, very noticeable thing on the two watches here as well is the fact that the Yacht-Master features a completely rounded off case. Every line on it is quite rounded, and that really lends itself to that polished finish, that really glowy luster. You know, that luster that the watch creates is totally different to that of the Submariner, which kind of has facets more so because the edges are very sharp and clean. The lugs also seem to splay out much more on the Submariner. That's partly because they don't curve inwards, they actually just move straight outwards with the case, whereas the Yacht-Master has this kind of illusion where those lugs kind of bend down towards your wrist to help conform to your wrist a little bit better. It has a bit more of a dressy feel about it, more of a dress watch style. Definitely on your wrist, when you see them on your wrist, you can tell the difference between the way that the lugs interact with your wrist. I'd definitely say that the Yacht-Master has much more of a smaller presence as a result of this. Another big difference between these two watches is, of course, our bezel. The bezel on the Submariner is a ceramic bezel or cerachrome bezel with platinum inlays for all the numbers and the index markers on there, on the actual bezel that is. So, and that's designed really for purpose and longevity. That is it has platinum inlays because of platinum's ability to resist corrosion and tinting with time in terms of color, changing color with time. So that's why they placed platinum there, and also the ceramic is extremely scratch resistant and doesn't fade with time as well in terms of color also. So the Yacht-Master, however, is completely different. It features a platinum bezel that is sandblasted and has these raised numbers in polished finish from the bezel. So a completely different look to the Submariner. Of the two, which do I prefer in terms of case? I'd probably say I much prefer the Yacht-Master in terms of case. I prefer that smaller presence on my wrist. I think it's a beautiful case. It's a really, really nice mix between the elegance of a classic watch with a polished finish, a much more dressy watch, but it also combines that more utility feel that the sports watches in Rolex's collection have. And it definitely appears much more dressy than the Submariner. The dial on these two watches is also kind of similar. They both feature those similar maxi markers. The hands are identical. We have obviously the difference being, main difference on the Yacht-Masters is that we have contrasting coloured second hands on these watches. For example, this one here featuring this blue, which is a really, really nice blue tone with the Yacht-Master writing also in that same blue. We also feature a sunburst effect dial on the Yacht-Master, which is a really, really cool effect. It's kind of laser etched and looks like a CD. It brings real life to this watch, especially when you get it in the sunlight. It just looks so magical. Definitely gives it a more elegant and interesting look versus the Submariner. The Submariner is a very plain looking watch. The Submariner, however, is much more readable than the Yacht-Master. The Yacht-Master is a very readable watch, but the contrast between those white hands and that black dial on the Submariner really helps it to be extremely legible, and that's obviously very important for someone who's diving with the watch and just wants to be able to give it a quick glance and continue with their dive. But that really concludes the differences in the features between these two watches. So which of these two would I own? Well, it really depends on what I would be looking for from a watch. When am I going to wear this watch? You know, what sort of clothes am I going to wear this watch with? The Yacht-Master is much more suited to a very much more smarter outfit. It's also very, very versatile. Yes, it does edge more towards the dressy end of a sports watch because of that polished case and that polished bracelet, and that platinum bezel definitely has much more of an expensive look about it versus the Submariner. It's extremely versatile. It goes with so many outfits. You know, if you're just wearing shorts and t-shirt, it still looks great. And of course, if you wear it with a suit, it looks fantastic as well. The problem that I've sometimes found with the Submariner is you wear it with a suit, it has quite a deep depth to it, so it doesn't always fit underneath a dress cuff or, you know, on a shirt. It also tends to stick out over the top of a suit. The brush finish on that watch can sometimes look a little bit too casual. So definitely, if my job was based in an office and I was wearing a suit every day, I'd edge more towards the Yacht-Master. But either way, you're getting a very versatile watch from both. Just the Yacht-Master tends to be much more smarter, and as a result of that, a little bit more versatile. Of the two, which would I own? Well, I tend to put my watches on a strap, so that kind of dresses down the Yacht-Master a little bit and kind of changes the argument a little bit. I think personally that the Submariner looks better on a strap than the Yacht-Master does. But either way, great watches, both of them. Probably I would choose the Submariner though if I had to choose between the two of them, purely because I wear my watches on a strap. If I was to wear them on the bracelet, without question, I would go for the Yacht-Master. Thanks guys for watching. Let us know in the comments which of these two watches you prefer. Let me know what other watches you'd like us to compare. And as always, if you're interested in either Yacht-Master or the Submariner, then don't hesitate to contact us. Our details are down in the description, and also at the end of the video, we'd be happy to give you a quote for either watch to call them into stock, or any other watch that you're interested in as well.